Hello class, today we are going to be going over how to make one of these hooks that would go to a block and tackle construction. In the future I might make a video on how to actually put this together with a block and tackle, which would be some good practice for driving holes and punching rivets, but for right now let's just focus on the hook. Now I'm going to be using some stock that is quite a bit thicker than the stock that you guys are going to be using, so don't expect to have to do quite as much just moving of the material as I'm doing in this video. I'm pretty exhausted after putting this together and I don't really want to put you guys through that. So, let's get into it.
Alright, so I'm beginning with this piece of what if I remember correctly, is 1 inch by 3/4 inches thick. This is considerably thicker than the material that you're going to be using. You're going to be using the bar stock, the I think 1/4 by 3/16 or something like that we have. Either way, what you're going to begin with is just making a point, and this is going to be a really long one-sided taper. And part of the reason why we want you guys to do this project before we have you do knives is because this is essentially the same process that you use for profiling the tip of a knife. So as you can see, I made a taper, making sure to knock down the corner first so that I didn't get any fish lips on the end. I know that some of you in the class were struggling with that. And then I worked that taper back, working from a very steep taper to a more shallow one. And because my material is so thick, I also tapered it to a point in the other dimension. Your material will be thin enough that I don't think you'll need to do that. What's really important here is seeing that the taper I made is about the length of the anvil. Depending on how big of a hook you wanted to make, you might even make it a little bit longer than that. And because my material is so thick, I also decided to go through and knock down the corners, just because if I hypothetically ever actually used this hook, I wouldn't want the sharp corners to fray any rope that I hung from it. With the tapering done, I'm going to make a little bit of a flared tip at the very end of the hook, and this is just so that it's easier to slide like a loop of rope or a chain loop or something like that on and off of the hook while it's in use. It's something that you see pretty commonly in this style of hook. Next, I'm going to establish the bend where the hook is going to loop around, and it's almost the same as the process for shouldering, and as you can see there is a little bit of a shoulder forming as I bend this, except whereas with a shouldering your hammerhead would be half on and half off, here you are striking full off of the anvil. And this is going to make both sides of the bend curve a little bit, so you're going to want to make sure that you're keeping everything nice and flat. Then once you have it at a little bit less than 90 degrees, you're just going to go around the horn of your anvil and start curling that around. I decided that about there is pretty good for this size of hook. And if you didn't do the straight bend at first, then your hook would be off center with the with where it's hanging. The center of balance would be off. I'm cutting it off with about 1.5 inches worth of material between where I'm cutting and the quote-unquote neck of the hook. And all of this material that I am leaving on as extra, that is going to be drawn out and looped around into the eye of the hook, where it would be connected to a block and tackle with a rivet or a screw or something like that. Or it could even be hung from another hook. Now this is a lot of material for me to draw out by myself, so I'm going to establish a shoulder, and then in a second here we are actually going to call over one of the newer members of the club who is going to help me by sledging. As you can see, having someone sledge for you just makes it go so much faster. Looking back at it now, I probably should have drawn this out even further than I did, but about here is where I left it, where the thickness of the loop at the base where it connects is a little bit less than half the thickness of the total bar. And like I said, probably could have drawn it out a little bit more than that. The eye ended up being a little bit chunky. So after you have it drawn out, you're going to go around the corners and smooth it out and make it round, because once again, if you were hanging this from a rope or something like that, you wouldn't want any sharp corners that are going to wear out the rope over time. And it does get a little bit difficult to hold on to the piece once you're at this point, so make sure that you have a really good grip on your tongs. And then once you have it rounded, much like with the initial bend for the hook, you are going to bend this out so that you have a symmetrical eye instead of one that leans more to one side than the other. And just like you've done many times now, you're going to go over the horn of the anvil and you are going to close that eye. If you wanted to leave it open so that you could, slip a hook into it or a ring or something like that, you can. Typically these are closed because they are meant to have something put through them that could be tied off like a rope or closes like a carabiner, or just be riveted in place permanently. And once you have done that, you have successfully made a block and tackle hook.